I don't think people build that self-awareness before they get out of the military. Then they hit those rough seas of getting out of the military, and there is the uncertainty, and there is the lack of linearity. There is the shakeup of all of the things. The accoutrement is all
Mm.
shaken up. But I also don't think that people view that chaos as a catalyst for growth. I think that people most of the time just try and put their head down and run through it as quickly as possible. And so then they end up on the other side and they might not be in a job that they like, or like you said, they take the first job that exists because they just want the chaos to end. Um, so, what do you think you would have needed to hear before the chaos to have done that work to have made the chaos a little bit easier in as you're going through that process? Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Post Military Podcast. If you're new here, welcome. I'm very happy you decided to stop by. This podcast is designed to prepare people for major transitions from one chapter of their life to another. And currently, we focus on moving out of the military and into the civilian world. My guest today is Billy Cannon. Billy, besides having a phenomenal first name, also was an Air Force intelligence officer who worked in Air Force cyber warfare. On today's conversation, we talk about his time in service, his transition out of the Air Force, and the advice that he would give to servicemen and women who are about to follow in his footsteps. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Post Military Podcast. This is Billy, the other
Hi, Billy.
Cannon.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on today, Billy. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate you joining this illustrious podcast, which I've hosted many episodes of so far. So thanks for being
Man,
a guest.
when you reached out to me and I was working at a variety of different cybersecurity firms, I knew just I had to join, but not before St. Patrick's Day. I had plans. I had plans for
Right.
St. Patrick's Day.
Right. Yeah. How incredibly rude of you to
I know.
to
I
move the
know. Well,
initial
I'm
taping because of some social engagements that you had.
hey, listen, I'm glad I could finally make it on. All right, well, welcome back everybody. That is I'm just geeking out right now because it's not every day that I get to have another person with a phenomenal first name on the pod. So Billy, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Are you coming live from your loft right now? Is that where we're at?
I am. Actually, we just moved here about 3 days ago, so
Oh
I
my gosh,
apologize for the
congratulations.
starkness of the walls.
No,
But yeah,
it's kind of
Billy, thanks.
cool. I like the vaulted ceilings. They're
Yeah.
nice.
Oh, thank you. Cool. That's why we bought it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a cool look. Great background for I'm a connoisseur of backgrounds of people's Zoom setups for now. So it's nice when I see cool ones. So
Yeah,
gotta
I was
always talk about
debating
it.
with just keeping it El Natural or doing like the cool
Mhm.
beach or background or video,
Yeah,
something
no,
like
I
that.
got you. Yeah, no, I like the all natural. It's good. You should keep it. So
Cool. Thank you.
all right, man. Well, let's kick it off. Tell everyone a little bit about your military career.
Yeah, so I joined the military out of ROTC. In college, I went to University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I studied Japanese. And one of the reasons I signed up was that they had a program where you could get a scholarship if you were a foreign language speaker. And it just jumped out at me. I had no idea what I was going to do. And my father was in the Air Force. He served during Vietnam, so I was like, okay, this gives me some direction, right? And I got out, went to Intel school in San Angelo, Texas, where I then became intelligence officer and was assigned to the 624th Operations Center, 24th Air Force in San Antonio, Texas, where I did cyber intel for over 5 years there. And I had a couple of different roles. I worked in a security operations center looking at indications and warnings, did long-term analysis, correlation, fusion, did some brief work as an executive officer, who, for General Tom Murphy, who was incredible. and eventually ended up doing large scale exercise planning, the cyber warfare component of it. After that, I did do some time in the reserves, working for the 854th Combat Operations Squadron out of San Antonio as well.
Very cool. What's correlation fusion? Because that sounds really tight.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a fancy military word for or acronym ACF is what it was called, where essentially we would take all source intelligence or intelligence that we were gathering from different components of the DoD and government, and then analyze it and then correlate it with stuff that we're seeing that was relevant to our network and our mission set, fuse it, and then produce finished intelligence with it.
That's really cool. And then what was the so when you did cyber intel,
Mhm.
I'm not super familiar with the intel space. Did you choose cyber intel or was cyber intel thrust upon you when you went to your tech school?
That's a good way of phrasing it. So essentially, when you're in Intel school, um, you've seen Harry Potter, I assume, and like the Sorting Hat. So it's kind of a very similar process, right, for for Intel officers, where you go through a series of courses, right, and curriculum where you test on different components of what you would be covering as an intelligence officer. So there's everything from human intelligence to fighter planes to all this other stuff, and depending on how well you do in certain sections, you combine that with a dream sheet that you put together and a wish list of locations that you'd like to go to, and then they send you there. And cyber intelligence, unfortunately, I envisioned myself like working in Japan, hence speaking Japanese. When the sheet comes out, you serve at the leisure of the Air Force, and there was nothing of that flavor there. So Intel was one of those, or cyber Intel was one of those things where I was like, okay, this is a really cool field. It's up and coming. It's a good chance to to define some stuff and help do that. The initial groundwork. So it was high up on my sheet, and I got assigned. So
That's awesome. I mean, you basically just described how I ended up in cyber warfare in the Air Force. I studied history and then was like, I don't know what I want to do when I get out. And cyber seemed really up and coming, bleeding edge type stuff, and so that's how I ended up in it. So I definitely understand. Do you still speak not Spanish, Japanese?
um, conversationally, I could probably, if I were hanging out with someone, have a conversation with them. My reading has completely disappeared, right? And I tried staying up with it, but there's not a lot of opportunity
I
to.
mean
So
that makes sense.
yeah,
That's like unless you're like an avid, I don't know, anime watcher or something like that, I can't imagine that you have a lot of opportunities to
yeah.
speak Japanese.
It's
So
it's funny you bring that up because even then, like the Japanese they speak in anime is like not reflective of like what conversational Japanese actually
seriously,
sounds like. So you
stop.
could tell. Yeah, I lived over there in college for a little bit, for a little over a year in Sapporo, and like you kind of tell like who got their Japanese from anime because they'd talk like an anime character. And it's like, okay, like you can't, that's not like how it sounds. It was actually pretty comical, when you run into
That's
that.
so funny. Okay, well, I am an avid anime watcher, so that really just shattered uh all of my preconceived notions about Japanese speaking people. So that's super awkward. Welcome to the post military podcast where we crush prejudice every single day.
Yeah. Hey, you start somewhere, it's like, you pick it up and you just naturally flow into it, right? It's just you
Yeah,
sound like you were, from Dragon Ball Z. So yeah.
that's so funny. Okay, now I'm just envisioning like a normal, because I know what that would sound like in English if
Yeah.
someone was just talking like a regular person, and then someone comes in who's watched one too many like 80s action movies, and they
Right.
walk in sounding like a combination of Rocky and or like Arnold and Sylvester Stallone. Like,
Right. Yeah. Just a
what are you
ton of
doing?
like really great one-liners about
Oh
like
yeah,
defeating your opponent, and then like not much in the way of like, hey, how was your day?
that's man, that's so okay. That's hilarious. That's the greatest thing that I've learned all week. So
All right,
thank you for
show's
that.
over. We're
Yeah, exactly. Cut. Um, so why did you so I'm assuming you just did your well, is it 4 or 5 years for
It
ROTC?
was at 5, and then I tagged on because I got a reclama to stay in my unit for a little bit
Mhm.
longer. So I think it was like 5.5 total active duty.
Okay. And what was the driving force for you for your separation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the big ones was, as an intelligence officer, you really kind of run the gamut in terms of like your core discipline of what you're studying intelligence for, right? And it's not like, hey, I'm a cyber intelligence officer, I'm going to be in cyber intel my entire time. You know, you'd probably move to space and then fighters or something like that. And for me, it was a combination of wanting to get really good at a specific field, right? And that was cyber. And I, because it has applicability not just in the military, but in the private sector is really cool. And also the aspect of being able to like stay where I want and put down roots. I think that was a big one too. Was I like the idea of like, hey, I really like what I found in Texas. I'm in Austin, Texas right now. I loved it. Met my wife here, and I wanted to stay here, and I didn't want to be jumping around consistently. So those were two really big factors. It's kind of like having control over my own destiny, right? Like, okay, I'll move around, I'll do these things for the Air Force, but at some point, I want to be able to like put down roots and essentially steer, where I wanted to go on my terms. So.
When did you feel like you start like when did that switch flip for you? Was it always kind of in the back of your mind that I want to stay cyber, I want to stay put, or was there a change at some point in your 5 years in when that happened?
Yeah, great question. I think it was gradual, right? And it was as I really kind of dug into the field and got a sense for the discipline, working with other people in the intelligence community and especially like the Air Force officer ascension path, right? And talking like, well, if you want to do this, you're going to have to go here and then go there and then do a year here and go there and do that. And I was like, okay, it's a lot of traveling, right? And like I get it, it's cool, but like that and like I really got into cyber. The more I learned about it, and as I was, staying in the field, I got to interact with people in industry a considerable amount, and I thought it was the coolest thing. Like seeing like all these, and this was like in the golden era of like cyber security funding, right? So it was you had FireEye coming up, and it was like, you know. $80 billion a share, and you had all these different companies getting funding, and all these different VC firms putting money into cybersecurity, and everyone's like, hey, we got this cyber thing, we realize it's super important, we're still figuring out where it needs to be the most important, right? And what the best solutions are. So it was a really interesting time to be in the field. And I was like, I kind of want to be here. This is like a nexus for something new. This is a nexus for a new technology that's going to be ubiquitous, right? Throughout industry as well as in the military. And the thought of like going from that to doing like, shame on me. Everyone in the Air Force is going to cringe when they're going like fighter jets, right? I realize it sounds cooler, but like it's a very like, hey, fighter jets, airplane, air warfare. That's a very military kind of only thing, right? And then going to like space, and I was like, I want to be here in cyber. I think this is going to be huge. I'm really intrigued by it, so I want to stay, stay put.
Yeah, and I think that it's a very good it's a good reason to recognize, and for people who aren't in the military who are listening, there once you kind of get on the ride in the military, once you start, there's a lot of forward momentum, and it's almost impossible to knock yourself laterally into other paths.
Mm-hmm.
And so I completely agree with you. If you don't like the ride that you're on in the military, it's very hard to get off and either stay where you are or move laterally into something else. So I think that that's a really good reason. And so when you realized, hey, I want to dive deep into cyber, I really dig this, and also I want to stay in Texas because I'm liking where I'm at right now, geographically speaking. Um, when did you seriously start preparing to get out of the military? Like what did that preparation When did it happen, and
Yeah.
what did that preparation process look like for you?
Yeah, so it was a lot of internal struggling, I guess, that to just kind of get through it, at first. And I would say it started um, right after my stint of being an executive officer, right? Of working for the GO, and I love that experience. The general I worked for is just absolutely incredible. Um, but there was a part of me that was like really not feeling the whole sense of impending transition. And I just remember it just always felt like there was kind of a cloud in the back of my head of like, okay, this is cool, but then every 3 years, focusing on where you're going, what you're going to be doing, is getting in the way of you really diving into the now, right? Of diving into that, because like, oh, okay, I'm going to go with this assignment, because you get to kind of, I wouldn't say pick, but you get to um, have heavy influence in your next unit after you do the executive officer stint, right? And I went to a unit, and it was in a role that was absolutely fantastic. And then I was in that role for like 2 months, and I was like, "This is great. I wouldn't mind doing this for like a couple more years or something." But I already had burned a reclama, right, in order to get that role, right? And for those who don't know what a reclama is, it's a special request you can submit to stay put at a particular unit, instead of entering a transition cycle to go to your next unit. So I was fortunate enough to get one. I was able to go to this unit, and like within a month or two of being there, it was like, all right, you already got to think about what's next. You're getting messaged by the personnel center. They're telling you where to go, so on and so forth. And I already kind of been feeling this and struggling with this feeling for a little bit. And at that point, it was just like, I just got to pull the ripcord. I just have to make a decision, because to your previous point, it is very easy to get stuck in that momentum, right? Of well, I've already done 5 years. Why not go for the 10, right? And then you're at the 10. Well, I'm already
Might
halfway
as
to
well go for
retirement.
15.
Why not just do the 15? Why not just do the 20, right? And then I'm retired, and then I can just do this, in perpetuity. So I was really like, okay, I've just got to pull the ripcord. I've got to make the decision. And I did. And that preparation process was a lot of networking. I had to be vocal about my decision to separate, and that was probably the toughest part, honestly, because once you start doing that, and I told my commander at the time, like, hey, I had a meeting with her, and I was like, ma'am, like, I'm going to be getting out of the military. Like, my term of service is up, and the cat's out of the bag. It's difficult because people know you're getting out, right? And you just gotta own that. And some people don't like that feeling. They don't like the feeling of like, oh, you're leaving us, you're leaving the team, right? Like you're quitting. And I just had to own it, and I had to start building my network. And once I just owned the decision, it got much easier as time progressed. But like that phase of like, I'm not sure, and you're talking to people, if you've got your mentor, that like cool DO that's like, hey man, what are you doing? Think about this cool stuff. And it's like, okay, like I get that, but at the same time, you walk that path, you haven't walked the other one. Let me find someone who has walked the other path and talk to them about it. And that's kind of what helped me out too.
Yeah, I mean, man, there's a lot to dig in there, and I think for the first thing that we'll talk about is kind of that fear, or not
Mhm.
fear, that like sense of betrayal almost, which, to add more context for people who don't know what an executive officer is, you're working incredibly closely with someone who is important enough in the Air Force for them to have essentially an executive assistant, which is what you were. And so uh, Billy was working very closely with this very important person, and it might set you up to be the heir apparent, but it certainly looks very good on your records. And so coming out of that, you had real juice with people who could get you going to places that you wanted to go. And so then to then go, yeah, this isn't for me. It almost is like you're almost you could feel like, oh, I'm just like flipping the bird to these people who set me up for success, which I think is very valid. Um and so when you say you owned it, like what what does that look like, and what advice might you give to others who are having to tell people like, hey, I'm getting out of the military, like I need to, because I think that's really hard for a lot of people who want to get out, but then they feel like, oh, I'm betraying the team, like you
Mhm.
said, or they just get sucked into work, which means they neglect their transition. Like, what are some things that you would recommend to people to help move through that?
Yeah, it's really tough, and I think you have to really do some self reflection of like you're having this thought. Why are you having this thought? Is it just because I want to play with the possibility of doing something different, or I don't like doing PT in the morning and I'm pissed off at this officer, so I'm going to leave, or I'm pissed off at my supervisor, whatever. Um, I'll show them, right? The military will never work without me. But really do some self examination of like, what are your long term goals professionally, right? And how do you feel? Are you happy, right? Based on the career path of people, in your similar rank and where you see yourself progressing, what does that look like? And is that really kind of the path you want to go down? And just think about it really, really, really intensely, right? Over an amount of time. And you just have to own that decision. And it's okay to be wavering, right? It's okay to not know. It's okay to talk to other people. And that's a great point you bring up, because that was brought up to me several times. Was like, hey, you got really good rank on your OPR, which is an officer performance report. So everyone kind of gets a stratification. You have a lot of juice. You could go really far. But it just came down to, kind of the decision of like, I don't, my heart isn't in this full time, right? I love my country. I love the people I've been serving with. I'm happy to have had the privilege to serve. But in terms of what I want to do long term, it doesn't really align with it. Maybe I can kind of have my cake and eat it too by doing the reserves, right? And that's why I went into the reserves after for a little bit. Was like, I want to try this out to see if I can still stay in, have the option of going as a full-time reservist if I want to, but still be able to wear the uniform and serve while kind of being able to shape my own destiny. So it's okay to feel conflicted, right? I would say give yourself a timeline, right? And be like, okay, by this date, if I'm, 8 months out of my change of duty station or whatever, and I haven't made a decision yet, then I'm going to stay in, or whatever it is. But give yourself a timeline, hold yourself accountable, but at the same time, like really, really think about you, right? Think about, if you have a family, your family, and just think about that lifestyle, right? And you could be like, you know what? I'm just having a bad day. I'm letting some other people kind of influence me. I'm going to stay in. I really love this. I want to do this for the rest of my career. That's perfectly fine. Like do that 100%. Like we, but at the same time, some people I think can kind of do mental gymnastics too. And it's a result of like letting other people make a decision for you. And I think that's a really easy thing to fall into in the military, right? Where you like, you don't want to lose what you've built up, right? So just own your decision, talk to people, but ultimately, like you've got to be able to just say, this is the path I want to take.
I think that the big takeaway for anyone listening with what you just said is, and what I think you did really well is, you had a very strong foundation for your transition, which was your desire to dive deep into cyber and a recognition that your career was not going to let you do that in the Air Force. And then you wanted to stay in one place to be in Texas with your wife, which, again, not something that you could do in the Air Force. And if somebody does not build that strong foundational understanding of the reasons why they want to get out, then dude, people can blow holes in your arguments
Yeah.
till the sun goes down every single day. And so if you can build that foundational set of beliefs, it allows you to kind of ride the ups and downs, because there's a lot of unknowns that you're going to have to work through in your transition as well. And I think that it's phenomenal advice for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's a great point, because I had several people, when I was looking to get out, kind of do that and like poke holes. Well, you could get assigned here, you could stay here, and I get that, but like at the end of the day, like you can just kind of feel something in your chest, right? And you could be like, look, I just this just isn't for me, you know, and that's okay too. That's okay too. But I think what's important is like you're thinking two steps ahead of like, okay, if I decide to get out, this is what I have to start doing to prepare. And if I'm going to stay in and I'm currently dissatisfied with my experience, these are the things I need to look for in my future assignments, my career path, to make sure that like I'm going to be able to optimize my experience and my contribution back to the military.
So the other thing that you did, I think, really well is, well, sounds like you did really well, is networking.
Mhm.
So what is that? What did that look like for you? Because
Yeah.
I think it's a very key component of getting out, and it's also how we met.
Yeah.
So that's so
Yeah.
yeah, tell everyone how what your strategy was there.
Yeah, no, that's great. So networking is I would say that it's the secret sauce to a successful transition, right? Um, so in terms of that, I remember when I was first getting out, I had the idea I was going to start a company with a colleague of mine who's also getting out, and that quickly, had more holes in it than Swiss cheese. So there was a point where I was like, okay, I got to scramble. But in that process of like getting out, I'd talked to several people in industry and just been like, hey, what do you do? What is your role? Because like, I'll be honest, I was frankly floored when I saw like how many roles were available. Like that, like what I do right now, like partner engineering, or when I first did sales engineering, I'd never heard of that before. I was like, what the hell is that? Right. And it was through talking to people that I kind of realized how flexible the private sector can be in terms of like, how it structures itself and how companies organize themselves to accomplish their growth objectives, right? So networking, I think, LinkedIn, I'm a huge LinkedIn fan. I think that is one of the best tools because you can look at people who have been in a similar life experience of you that are maybe in the field that you're looking to go into. Word of mouth is a very, very big one too. Just talking to people that like, hey, I've got a friend who's doing what you're looking to do. Why don't we set up a conversation? And I would say in those conversations, um, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for a favor in them. I think is a really big one, and just kind of build that network, right? And then eventually, when you put yourself out there enough, people will think about you when an opportunity arises. And you don't get those opportunities to come to you if you're just kind of like sitting on your TV slinging your resume to 80 different employers saying I want to be a program manager, right? Those opportunities come up, fun fact, job search secret, is when people who are hiring or know people or can influence people who are hiring say, I got someone who's great, let's plug them in this role. And that's what happened to me. And eventually, when that opportunity came up, an acquaintance of mine, her name is AJ, reached out and said, hey, I think you'd be perfect for this role. Let's get you in. And then I was able to interview and get the role. So,
One thing that I will ask you, which I think is interesting that you said, was don't be afraid to ask for favors. When do you think that someone should ask for favors?
yeah, so that's a great point. So when I say favors, I mean don't be afraid to like ask someone to be like, hey, if something comes up, could you put me in contact with that person? Could you recommend me for that job role or that rec, right? Just could you teach me a little bit more about what you're doing, right? Um, Having an objective in mind is obviously the first thing, right? And your objective is probably going to be, to work where you want to work, or at least educate yourself enough to the point where you're able to discern what type of role you want to get into, what type of industry, yada, 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 right? So I'd say when you're having those conversations, always go into a conversation with a little mini objective for yourself, right? And it doesn't even have to be, just to get this person to apply me for a job. It could be something, but like you're talking to someone for a reason. They are giving you their time, right? They're making a commitment to give you their time because they're offering themselves as a resource to you, right? So take advantage of that, right? If you're talking to someone who's at the company that you want to eventually work for, and they might not be in the same role or whatever, hey, I really enjoyed talking to you. Could you put me in contact with someone who maybe has that role right now at, XYZ org, so that I could talk to them? And, sure. 9 times out of 10, unless you're an absolute, an absolute red flag, they're going to say, let me hook you up and let's make this happen and facilitate that conversation.
I think that that's wonderful advice. And the um, two things that I'll tag up that you said that I really liked is A, come in with a mini objective. It is to give everyone who said, oh, come in with a mini objective. What does that mean? To give you an example, this would be a really bad podcast if when Billy and Billy logged on, and host Billy did not. If I came with 0 questions and we turned on the record, I was like, "So what do you want to talk about?" That's a horrible podcast. It's bad for my guest because you don't really know what to at like what you're like, I don't know, like what am I here for? And then it's really bad for me because we'll both I can't run the conversation, then we'll both leave like, well, that was a phenomenal waste of both of our times. And the same thing can be said for these networking calls.
Yeah.
When I was getting out, like when I met you, I had talked to enough people with the mini objective of how do I get out of the military? So I kind of understood the VA process. I kind of understood what to look out for. I already knew that I wanted to be in cyber, and I talked to you specifically, I believe, about um you were at Rapid 7 at the time. What were you doing in Rapid 7?
I was a solutions engineer.
That's right. I was talking to you specifically about solutions engineering because I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And so I remember you and I had a really productive conversation because we logged on and I was like, here's who I am. I'm really interested in solutions engineering. Tell me about it. And you were very gracious and told me a bunch of stuff about solutions engineering that I hadn't heard before. And it was a valuable conversation that hopefully that I left and I was like, wow, that's a really good conversation. Hopefully you left going, that was like you felt like you actually gave me something of value, and that's the benefit of the mini objectives because I am providing you with that satisfaction of a job well done because you're a mountain of knowledge, but you don't know what's going to benefit me, so I have to know what to ask so that you can tell me what what will benefit me. And so um you as the askee, you're running the questions. Just remember that. You're the one guiding the conversation. And I think way too many people show up to these calls and they're like, okay, person, you're telling me stuff, right? And they're like, well, no, I don't know. Like, I don't know what you need to know. So I think that I think that that's a phenomenal thing. Like, that's a phenomenal piece of advice and something that I would highly recommend to anybody listening.
Yeah, and
So,
and
yeah.
you know, first off, I was like, this guy's a William who goes by Billy, so obviously a winner. We need to
Beast.
we need to get him at Rapid
Absolute
7
unit of a
Fueling.
guy. Got to
Yeah,
talk to him.
exactly. But that's a great point because I think the same applies for your job interviews, right? And I think when you're talking to people, right, you know, the military kind of inculcates this idea of like you're passing a test, right? You ran the fastest mile in your PT, you got the highest score, you got the highest strat. So people should be just throwing jobs at you and throwing salaries, and they're going to take care of you because you scored the highest on everything and you answered all their questions correctly, right? And when you're interviewing, it's important, I think, to demonstrate not only for the employer but also for yourself as a as a veteran that you're being a little critical of them as they're being critical of you to join a role, right? You got to be thinking about, one, am I going to have the tools and the expectations laid out before me where I can be successful in this role, right? Is it the type of company that I want to join? Am I going to enjoy the people that I'm working for, right? And three, as a recently separated veteran, am I going to be getting right back into the crap that I got in the military for, right? So when I talk to a lot of people, I do a mentorship service called, it was Veterana that we met through, right? The Veterana application, right? And a lot of those calls I join and people don't have questions, right? And they'll come in being like, "Oh, I saw you work here and that's where I want to work." And I'd be like, "Cool. What do you want to do?" Program manager, yeah. And it's just like, great, like let's take a little scalpel to that and like talk about like why you want to do that, why you're looking at this company, and how you can kind of differentiate yourself, but also, hold that company accountable a little bit during your interview process to show that you're thinking critically about this role, and how you're going to impact the company and the culture there, right? Instead of just passing the test and checking the boxes. Oh, got my master's. Oh, got my PME complete. Oh, went to squadron officer school. Went to airman leadership school. Good to go. I should be promoted to X. And that's not how it works, in most companies outside of the military. So it's important to make sure that you're thinking about those things.
I think One thing I want to talk about interviewing more in depth because
Sure.
I know that you gave me great advice when we talked about it, and we I know there's things that you want to cover there. But first, the one thing that I think is people should be aware of, and that's the other thing I wanted to tag up in your the last thing that you said, which you just repeated, is my thoughts on favors are you need to be likable and you need to be inquisitive before you ever consider asking anybody to do anything for you. Because if you're getting out of the military and you're asking someone for advice or you think you're going to ask someone for a favor, understand that they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They are taking time out of their day, which people, if especially in cybersecurity, people are busy.
Hmm.
And a lot of us work remotely, which means we're on the clock a lot longer than we think we are. And so understand that going in. So what you don't want to do is open up a conversation with like, I need a job here, buddy.
Yeah.
Like that's a horrible so understand if you come in and you have questions, you want to learn, you want to validate someone's experience by allowing them to inform you. If you do that, you're going to seem likable and they're going to want to help you if you come in with that mentality versus opening up the door and just saying like help me and that's it. Like that's a horrible it it's a very important distinction to make because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are like, "Well, I'm a vet. I'm getting out, you're a veteran, so like help me." It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, we will help you. Just like be like nice about it, please."
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing to consider too is that like whenever someone is going to be recommending you or helping you execute on something, they're also tying their name to it, right? And I can tell you right now, if you do a favor or help get a job for someone who is not going to perform right or who doesn't realize that, it can have negative repercussions for the person doing it, right? That's your name, it's your brand, right? Whenever I bring people in, they're fantastic people, right? Or like that's one type of brand versus a brand of like, hey, like the last three people I've recommended have been have not been working out so great, right? So I think during the interview process, like having or at least the network building, asking for favors process, having that empathy, right? And putting yourself in the shoes of the person you're engaging with is extremely important. And some people might not be willing to do something or at least help you out until they've gotten to know you a little bit better, right? And that's huge because whenever I'm talking to someone and we're having a conversation about like, oh, I saw this rec, can you put me in? I'm looking for self-awareness, right? I'm looking for, if I put my name to this person, are they going to have the self-awareness and are they thinking about this, in a place where they can be successful versus like, yeah, sure, I'll just toss your name in a thing, right? So just because someone might not be willing to do something or might be wanting to talk to you a little bit more, just think about it like, hey, they're thinking about their brand and reputation, but they're also thinking about, am I setting you up for success, right? If you want to be in some type of role at this company and I talk to you and you're getting out of the military for these reasons and you're walking back into the same situation, I'm not gonna put you in that situation again, right? I'm not gonna put you in a situation where I don't think you can succeed, where I think you're gonna get discouraged, and really just I want to put people in situations where they can have that success, right? And it's something that you have to be receptive to. I think is that like, oh, I wanted to be well, I was a this level, I wanted to be a C level at this company, right? And it's like, okay, get it, but let's walk that back a little bit. Let's talk about these things, right? Because it's a two-way street. It's bilateral when you're engaging in that. And if you do recommend great people, then this person brings in great people, right? Which is fantastic. So just be aware of that when you're talking to people.
I think that's great advice and I think that it's very true. Like as you're getting out of the military, you don't know what you don't know and on one side, you do have a lot of phenomenal experience that is going to make you valuable to a workforce. But on the other hand, there are facets to a civilian company that you've never experienced before. And so there isn't this one to one translation of roles or what you think you're ready to be. And so just, yeah, agree, be receptive to that. one thing that I wanted to go back on that I thought was really interesting is you talked about everything's real. I forget the words that you specifically said, but it's like I have my master's. I did my airman leadership school. Like I did like everything was kind of laid out for you and it was very linear
Mhm.
and there's a lot of like driving force that is behind career progression in the Air Force or just in the military in general and something that I think is interesting that you talked about is you said that you had a fear of like your future was always impending. There's always going to be the next thing that was going to be given to you in the military. And I think that for a lot of people, that's actually really nice because I almost have this opposite opinion of you where for me, I felt a lot of freedom in the fact that I never had to make long term planning decisions. I just had to adapt to, like, I could give input, but it was always out of my control. Um, which made my transition really hard because I had to be the sole driving force behind everything that happened in
Mhm.
my transition. And so, do you think that that is something that people struggle with getting out? And what would be your advice to someone who has to really flip that switch from everything's laid out, I understand what my progression looks like, everything's kind of given to me if I let it be given to me, to if you do not put in the work, your transition is going to suck and you're not going to get a job.
Can I ask you something real quick first? So you
Yes.
said when you had to be the sole driving force.
Mhm.
Does that mean like where you're coming from in regard to the military had laid everything out and now you had to be the one to lay everything out? Yeah.
Yeah, like it's I know I'm going to move every 3 years. They're going to give me a dream sheet,
Right.
but if I don't fill out the dream sheet, I'm still going to move in 3 years. I'm always going to go up. I know exactly when I'm going to go up for captain. I know exactly when I'm going to go up to major and I can put energy in the system to kind of enforce my will a little bit, but things will always move forward with or without me and I'm just kind of on the ride to
Yeah.
some sense.
Yep. Yep.
But when you get out, that stops literally immediately. And it's like if you just sit there and stagnate, no one is there to stop you from doing that. And um, how would you advise people to avoid that stagnation?
Sure. I think this is, yeah, that's a fantastic thing to bring up because I think ultimately when people are like, oh, I want to get out, and I see, the private sector is this place with sunshine and rainbows and all the flowers are also lollipops and it's fantastic, right? They get hit with the fact that like, oh crap, there's no like career path set up for me, right? And I kind of like to think about that like a little conveyor belt process, right? And based on how well you perform, how you strat, the credentials that you have, your conveyor belt can go faster or it can go slower, right? But you can see the entire thing on the horizon, and go there. And I think that's really an examination of like you as an individual. What do you value in terms of your quality of life, right? Do you value security? Because I can tell you right now, like if you value security and stability, the government is probably one of the best places for you, assuming you're not out breaking law every night or doing something, doing something illegal, right? Um, so I think that's a very important part of it. Is like, how much do I value stability and guaranteed growth relative to the reasons why I'm thinking of getting out, right? And it is a big leap, and it's probably one of the toughest places. And this is where I see people fall into I don't want to say a trap, but like a lot of times when they're getting out of the military because of that uncertainty, that fog around their future, they'll take the first job that's offered to them to be like, got it, locked down, good, I don't care. And I see that often. And I think it's a reaction to that uncertainty of like, hey, the military, I could always see the end path, right? And there were no clouds in the way, right? I might not get there, but I'm going to get close. If not the top of the mountain, I'll get to the base, right? If I just check the boxes and get there. Um, where suddenly that's gone, right? You don't know what crags, what rivers, valleys, mountains are in between you and that mountain. Um, with the private sector, when you're transitioning, I think it's really one of those golden opportunities to kind of reset your trajectory, right? And the other one would be like getting an MBA or going back to school or something of that nature, where you get to choose your profession, your industry, your vertical, and really kind of redefine things. Because a lot of veterans, I don't think, realize like the skill set that they get in the military is pretty good, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you sign up and enlist when you're 18 years old, you get out at 24, 25, you've already got 6 or 7 years professional experience. You've probably been in a team, you've promoted, you've probably managed a couple different people, right? You've worked with systems that cost millions of dollars likely. So you've got a pretty good resume, right? Compare that to someone who started in the private sector at age 23 or 24. They're going to have to wait until they're in their early 30s to get the same level of experience, right? So hold value to yourself. But when you're getting out, I think you have to be ready for that chaos a little bit, right? And that's something that I frankly like found empowering. If you had looked at my security clearance form, before I got in the military, I had like 15 different jobs, man. It was a nightmare for my security investigators. So like, you were working in a movie theater while you were landscaping, while you were working at a gift shop at this amusement park. And I was like, yeah, why not? And they're like,
Clearly, these are all payments from China.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And why were they all foreign bank accounts, but anywho, so like for me, I found that incredibly empowering. Whereas like I get to kind of shape my own destiny. I get to create my own path, right? And I really like this. And then if I fail, then it's on me, right? Whereas like I can't blame the system anymore. I can't blame, oh well, this person's friends with that person. You run into that in the private sector or whatever. But when I was getting out, where I landed and the job I wanted to do was like, this is 100% me. I control how well I interview. I control the roles that I apply to. I can control the industry and vertical I go into. So I like that. I'd say just prepare that, prepare for that when you're getting out. And if that's something where you're like, actually, that's too risky to me compared to just like staying in, then stay in, but that's part of the job.
The thing that I love that you just said is I read a book once called Design Your Life, which yeah, it's up there. And one of the things that they talk about is when you're planning your life, they talk about gravity problems. And gravity problems just mean that there is a thing that it's a problem that you will encounter that is essentially immovable. It's going to be there. It's like a black hole. It exists and you have to deal with it. And the only way that you can overcome gravity problems is by reframing the problem to something that's to your advantage. And I love that because there was a lot of structure in the military to now there's a lot of uncertainty in my transition to there is not a lot of freedom in the military. I now have 100% freedom to do whatever I want outside of the military. That's an excellent way to reframe that problem. I think it's the key for people getting out of the military because
Mhm.
it's something that I did. And once I made that realization, it's like, oh, wait, like it's all on me. I don't have to wait for an assignments team to tell me where I'm going. I don't have to hope that I petition the right person. Like I just have to go talk to someone, and if I impress them enough, like they'll hire me. Like that's sick. I think that's really awesome. And then the other thing that you said that I want to dive into is you said that because of that uncertainty, if someone doesn't reframe well and they're just desperate and they just take the first job ever. And something that you said to me the first time we talked that I want to dive into for because I thought this was a really cool piece of your philosophy was you said don't look at it as like a what company am I going to get what company do I get to work for? You said think about it and who gets to hire me,
Yeah.
which I thought was like a really interesting like can you dive into kind of what that means and how you built that philosophy?
Yeah, so I think it's a mindset type of shift, and it was like one of those aha moments that I had in my job search, where we had talked previously a little bit about in the military, when you're promoting and you're getting an assignment, it's very much like check all the boxes, and you can go in the pipeline to be an operator, right? Or you can go in the pipeline to be a pilot, right? And then there's a test. And if you pass the test at a high enough percentile, you're good. And I think that that mentality is kind of ingrained almost in us as we're looking at assignments and roles and things we want to do. Whereas, in the private sector, I think there's a little bit more about potential around the person, right? And hey, this person is really capable and I like these aspects of them. I can hire them in this role, but long term, I'm thinking about their growth and their development and what they will contribute to the company over their total lifetime of their employment, right? And that could be in role A. It could be, well, they're good at role A, but I think they'd be really good at a leader in role B, right? Or I think that they should move into this technical thing, right? So in terms of the who gets to hire me mentality, is you really got to own all the cool stuff you did in the military and the accomplishments you had. You have to, and you think about what you go through in the military, and oftentimes what you kind of take as like the mundane or the trivial or like, oh, this part of the job sucks. Like you're actually experiencing something or going through a conflict at the highest level that it can be played at, in the world, right? I mean, if you've been in combat, you've gone through combat adjacent situations and stress like that. Like think about like what that puts you through versus like what you're going to go to in the private sector, which is like, unless you're like a first responder or something like that, like, oh, I didn't hit the deadline, and you look at a coworker and they're freaking doing backflips, sweating a gallon, and you're just like, oh, actually, like, well,
No one's dead.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like you've gone through like a very unique microcosm of experience, right? That not a lot of people can go through, and I think that really kind of puts you at a distinguished type of category where you've seen a different type of stress that involves people's lives. You've seen a different type of stress that really doesn't permeate certain aspects of the private sector, right? But also in that process in your job, you've gone through a lot of crazy things, right? Yeah, that not a lot of people are going to go through. And I think in the military, which is a good thing, is we're taught to be very humble, right? And it's a very, very pervasive mentality there of like, hey, oh, I only, how many times as in the military have you said, oh, I only did this, right? I didn't really, am not worthy of these things. Like these people have so much worse. And you think of that like bearded special operator with like the sleeves rolled up and the dope tattoo, and you're like, they got so much worse. The fighter pilot that was like shot down, but like you're still going through some pretty cool stuff, and it's important to be proud of that. I wouldn't say be haughty or to be boisterous about it, but you also have to realize that you've developed a very good skill set in the military, which I think is that the military teaches you how to get good at getting good at things, right? It teaches you to get good at getting good at things where you can get tossed a problem. It's not going to matter if that's your lane or not. Like you're going to figure it out to accomplish the mission, right? So when you're going into the interview process, you got to realize that you're an asset, and you have to go in with the mentality that like whatever company I go to that I select, I'm going to bust my ass. I'm going to do well. I'm going to deliver results. I'm going to ask questions when I don't know the answers, and I'm going to grow and help this company grow. And when you have that mindset, you realize that you can be an asset, right? And going in there, and when you demonstrate that to an interviewer and you talk to them critically and you think about growth and you ask tough questions, right? Then that's going to show this person has potential, right? I want them here versus I'm going to sit in an interview and let you hit me with questions. And then I might ask a question about what type of monitor can I get? Can I move after 3 years? And you're not thinking about the role, right? But you're thinking about this of like, hey, I'm a rock star. I've had a great experience. What am I going to be able to drive in terms of success? And is this the right place for me to be the most successful? And then it's a mutually beneficial thing rather than just sitting there and checking the boxes, right? So that's the synthesis, of what makes up that mentality in my opinion. I think it's a really good thing to have. You might not have it right now, and I would say go back and before you apply to jobs, examine things that you've done. Are you framing them in the right light, and are you looking yourself and valuing yourself enough where you can have the who gets to hire me mentality?
It goes back to this concept of ownership and being the driving force of your transition, for sure. And I want to ask you about how to get good at that in
Mm-hmm.
a second. But the one thing that I will agree with you 100% on is we're really good at downplaying our experience because we exist in the military space. So therefore you think everybody understands the military space. So if you come out hot and go, I was a comms officer that the closest that I ever got to combat was I managed servers that were in the Middle East from a network operations center in South Carolina, which is what I did.
Hmm.
Um, if I say that, someone who's never been a part of the military is going to understand exactly what I'm saying. And they're going to be like, yo, don't brag about that. Like, you're not a door kicker, like tier one guy. In reality, there's like 1% of the population of America was either in service or was serving or is like military adjacent in the sense that they're veterans. Probably more than that if you roll in veterans. It's very small though. Outside of that, if I go, I was in the Air Force, a normal person will go, so like planes, right? So no one
Yeah.
knows. And so you really no one knows what you did. And so you can talk about your experience like you said in a way that is gives you value because it is cool. It is cool and it is important and it is value added to a company. And you only as not you, but like the listener, you only downplay what you did because you view it relative to the things that you're aware of, not the things that everyone else is aware of, which I think is very, 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 very important.
Yeah. And
So,
I think, what you just said is it made me think of something that someone had told me when I was first getting out, which is like, you need to think about leaving the military like you're going to go work in a different country. It's like you've come from a place where work involves a lifestyle, work
mhm,
involves an ethos. It also has its own language, right? And those things necessarily aren't going to translate, right, when you go to the foreign land of private sector, right? So to kind of help in that process, I would highly advise that you find a translator, right? You find someone who isn't in the military and be like, can I talk to you about what I did for a second? And hopefully they're in the field you're looking to go into. And could you tell me if this makes sense or I am just like literally, speaking gibberish to you right now? And I did that. I remember one time I put together this resume. Man, I was a beast at writing bullets for like OPRs. I was like, this is great. Like fits
you were an
perfectly.
exec, so
Yeah.
like
Oh
I would
yeah.
hope so.
I
I
was,
would
I
hope
was, I
so.
was an assassin with those conjugations and semicolons. And I remember I submitted my resume to someone. And I was like, they're gonna love this. It's got the impact. There's metrics. Everything was perfectly. And they were just like, I don't understand a single thing on here. And it was something just as trivially as like the word readiness. I was like, readiness. Everyone knows what readiness is, right? Readiness is like making sure that you're prepared and trained and have all the tools and skills to be able to execute what you need to do. Like, you don't know what that is? And I'm like, no. I was like, okay, so like, how would you? And then you get in this little game of being like, oh crap, like there's 1,000 threads I've got to pull, right? So making sure that you're going into that process that you have a translator like that, and that only goes for the words that you're speaking, but also the experience, right? Um, you supervise people, you manage servers and in a global SD-WAN that was set up that was massive, right, compared to like a corporate network. I mean, you're at Amazon right now, so it's just as massive. But like if you're going to a smaller company, right, that's a big difference. So being able to kind of like think about those things that you might take for granted and be like, hey, it's not, that level of execution doesn't necessarily exist everywhere outside of the military. And realizing that you have a roadmap now of like, okay, I engaged at this level with this is kind of like what it could translate to and how we could translate that. So I'd say find a translator is huge.
And I think that I was going to ask you what was your biggest piece of advice for getting over that fear and also understanding like your worth uh as a military individual, but I think you just said it and I could not agree more and it's something that I did that was very helpful for me. I talked to so many veterans about my time in the military and was really able to discuss my experience in terms that made sense to all of the roles
Mhm.
that I wanted by the time that I actually interviewed. It was so incredibly helpful because the first time I told someone my experience, they were like, "No one's gonna get any of that. Like, you need to go back and do bup bup bup." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So yeah, I think that that's awesome. And one question that I'll ask you in addition to that is, are are there any other tips or tricks that you would give to the listeners for how to figure out what their value is as they're interviewing with a company for a specific role?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think a good trick there is to really understand the role that you're applying to. I can't stress how important enough that is of understanding that role in the interview process. So, like interviews usually will start out with a phone screen, right? And there's research you can do before that where you're researching about the role in general, right? You're looking at the rec, you're going on LinkedIn, you're looking at people who have that role at that company or maybe at other companies. You're reading about it and you're educating yourself about what they that role does, right? Now that rec might have some variance in it, might be old, right? Might need to be updated. So when you're talking during your initial screens, ask questions about what the day to day is. Ask questions about what the deliverables are. Um, how do people grow? What is the usual growth path out of that role? What are the skill sets? What are some situations where you see people failing, right? Make sure that you're digging into that and then you're relating it back to your experience, right? And you're doing that backward translation. And it's a process, right? When you interview, it's not just like, again, check all the boxes, you're good, you're a hot shot, we want you. There's that dual qualification that goes on, right? That bilateral qualification between you and the employer. But it increases in scope and engagement as you go through the process and get deeper into it. So I had a big fear when I was getting out that I wasn't technical enough because I was an intel officer, and you as a cyber operator, probably know, you looked at the cyber intel people and you were like, like, yeah.
As a comms officer who was specifically managerial and then worked as a technical instructor, I had the exact same fear because
Yeah,
I'd never been on keyboard my entire time. So I was like, dude, I don't know
yeah, no, exactly.
anything about
It's
cyber.
Yeah, it's the imposter syndrome, and you get it, and it goes back to like, oh well, I never did X because person X was so much more intense. Like I was never on keyboard either. I was doing analysis, I was doing fusion. I had to like, I know what all the stuff was because I had to deliver it in a briefing and reporting and stuff like that and drive actions. But like, I wasn't actually the one like SSHing into the firewall or whatever to or the system to shut it down or actually going into the group policy management thing and changing things or patching enterprise wide. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. So I remember during the interview process, that was like a huge obstacle I had to get over. That was like, okay, am I even worthy, right? Am I even at the level? And I think through that process I realized like I just got to ask the questions about what people have to do. And then if I have any doubts, I'm going to go and try and do the stuff on my own, right? I'm going to go and do some capture the flags. I'm going to do some on keyboard training. I'm going to set up an environment for myself and play around with it to just prove that. So I'd say you can suss that out during your interview process. Is like, okay, if I have real concerns about how technical I am, like about if I have the qualifications for this role, for any role, think about the questions that you ask during that interview process and how you can go validate them, right? Also important to understand that like no employer, I mean, I wouldn't say no employer, but like depending on the role, employers are going to have some type of onboarding or enablement or training, right? And what they're really assessing for is like, okay, do you have the plasticity? Do you have the foundational groundwork that exists for getting smart at product X that we sell, at this process, at this type of engagement, right? So understanding the core domain of what you're going into, what if that's product management, agile, waterfall, whatever it is, can really help, right? So don't think you've got to go in with like this rock star with a one-to-one translation of doing exactly what you did in the military to exactly what you're doing in the private sector, because you might miss out on some cool roles that you didn't even know existed. That might be a blend of those things. So
Something that you said that I want to dive into is you said it's like a bilateral evaluation, which brings up my next question, which is how can a veteran or someone transition out of the military, how do they know because you've also said like, how did they get to hire me? So there's very much
Mhm.
this theme of like, I'm interviewing the company as much as the company's interviewing me. How does someone know if the company's right for them?
Yeah, I think it's important to list down the things that you're looking for. And it all gets back to I'm getting out of the military, right? What are the reasons for that? What are the things that I know I have to have that are very important to me? What are the things that I'm willing to have some wiggle room and make some concessions on? And what are the things I absolutely know that I want nothing to do? I don't want to be within 10 feet of them, right? So I think the role is obviously a big one, right? Is you want to be doing, some very satisfying work, right? That you can be successful at and you're making a contribution to. But actually, one of your previous podcasts that I was listening to, I forget the name of the gentleman who said it, but there's a culture and there's a lifestyle aspect in the military, right? That sometimes you get out and you go to a job and there's a void there where you're like, oh, what about like volunteerism? What about like PT? What about like all this other stuff, right? Where you're trading a lifestyle for a job, right? So be sure to frame those things in the context of you accepting your next role, right? Of like, hey, what is the culture like? Is it like a startup culture? Do I want a startup culture? Do I want a bigger organization? Do I want to have more creative liberty at the expense of things not clearly being defined? Or do I want really defined processes that I can just plug into and start executing on, right? So start thinking about those things. And as you're networking, right? And it all starts with the networking, you're gonna hear things that are gonna be threads that you're gonna want to pull, right? Of like, I didn't think about that, right? Oh, I didn't think about that aspect of work. Like, do do y'all do things after work, right? Do you have like holiday parties? Do you do volunteer work, right? Are there like fit clubs or something like that? Is there like a club for like my interests or things like that? Or is there an employee resource group for veterans? That's a big one. Am I going to get into a place where there's no veterans that are working and I'm just like this alien that shows up with like three antennas and when I say something they don't understand what I'm talking about, or like I have no one to contextualize what a situation's like for me. That was actually a big one. Was I remember my first one-on-one in the private sector, I thought I was getting fired because like I remember a one-on-one was like, you are in deep shit, you are in trouble. And it was just like, no, we do this every week just to check in, see how you're doing. And I was like, huh?
Show up. I'm
Like
so
what?
sorry. I'm so sorry,
Yeah,
man. I
I
don't know
don't
what
know
I
what I
did, but
do.
I'll change. I'll do better.
Exactly. So, but I was lucky enough to like have some other veterans at the company. And I remember when that happened, I immediately reached out to them. I was like, "Hey, this happened, and I completely misread. What are some other things that I might run into here that are like, another big one was like travel, right? Like expense reports. Like I remember in the government, if like someone handed me a bottle of water that wasn't in the military, I was like, am I going to jail for accepting a bribe? You know, and that GTC might have weighed 10,000 pounds because I was terrified of it every time I picked it up. Whereas like in the private sector, it's not like that, right? Of course, there's regulations and policies and stuff like that, but it's different. So, thinking about those things and I would say they're like secondary or surrounding tertiary factors for your lifestyle, right? That the company or the job can have impact on as well.
I think that that's very true, and I think that the expense report thing is really funny because I remember the first time that I had to schedule travel for Amazon. Man, it was so much nicer than DTS. I was like, I called somebody, they did all the booking for me, and then they were like, "Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
What uh, what are your preferences for rooms? What are
yeah,
your preferences for seats on the plane?" And I was like, preferences for seat on the plane, like what do you mean? And then I was like, well, I found this hotel that is like on the outskirts of the city. They're like, no, 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 like we have a couple hotels in the city that are near the office, like you can pick one, this is the limit. And I was like, this is a high limit, and they're like, I know, we're Amazon, it's cool. Like, so it was just funny because I was expecting to be like in the boons at like a Days Inn or a Comfort Suites or something like that, like with like all the druggies or something. And
yeah,
so it was such a different like shift for me. It was very, very funny.
yeah.
And I felt the exact same way. So
It's funny.
completely
I remember keying in on that immediately, and it was like I didn't even realize like how much of an impact this could have on my professional life. Like not having to go through and like fight with the JTR, which is the Joint Travel whatever it is, rules,
Regulations.
regulations. That's it. That word. Like having that set up and then like arguing about like where you're going to stay, and then like the format isn't right, but then the format to submit the correction, the HTML on the website doesn't work correctly, and like just having that like set up. I remember just the same exact thing happened to me at my first private sector job, and I was like, I did not realize the impact this had
So
on my
nice.
mental stability of just being able to like stay next to an office, select the airline I want, right, and just like take a picture of a receipt, right, here are the rules, go forth. And it was just nice.
Yeah, man, it really is. And I think that we're talking about lifestyle a lot, which I think is awesome because I think it's a great time to pivot into this, like, after you get out of the military. So you go through this process, you do the networking,
Mhm.
all this. How long did that process take from when you started seriously prepping to get out to when you got out?
I would say about 8 months total.
How long do you think someone, if it's a perfect world, should take to do all this preparation?
Yeah, so I think when you're getting out, start building relationships as soon as possible. The one thing I do run into that some people don't realize is that like when a company has an open rec, they're going to want to hire someone sooner than later. So you can't apply to a job.
Sorry, I'm laughing.
Yeah,
I'll tell you the story when I'll
yeah,
tell you the story when I'm done.
yeah,
When
like
you're
a
done.
year out from when you're looking to get out, and then be like, oh yeah, we want you, we're going to hire you, and we'll just twiddle our thumbs for a year until then. There's things like DoD Skill Bridge, which is awesome, that can help you kind of ease into it, that I highly highly recommend, like hiring our heroes, things of that nature that can help you kind of get a foot in a little bit earlier, like with an internship. But like I'd say like start networking, but come to the realization that like your sweet spot for actually getting into the job is if that job is posted like more than 6 months out. I would even say less than that, like more, maybe more like 2 or 3 months out, to be realistic, from when you can fulfill it. They're probably going to be like, unless it's a massive program or something like that. So,
Yeah, sorry, I was laughing because, and to people who've listened to, well, actually, this podcast, that podcast isn't even out at the recording of this podcast. So, but you're gonna hear me say it twice. So the I interviewed for a small cybersecurity consulting firm that's actually in Austin, Texas. I can't. It's not Centurion.
Praetorian.
Praetorian. Thank
Yeah.
you. I interviewed with Praetorian 10 months before my exit date, and I did not tell them that because I didn't think it was a big deal. We get to the final interview, and they go, "So when can you start working?" I was like, January 31st of 2023. And they were like, that's in 10 months from now. I was like, so? And they were like, we can't hire you. Like, what are you doing? And then that's when I learned that that's not how things are done. And I had a guy on the show a couple of episodes ago who did the exact same thing. However, he did it with AWS, and AWS was able to hook him up with hiring our
Yeah.
heroes. So he essentially did he got the job, and then they just plugged him into a hiring our heroes cohort so he could start early. So he did it right. But for me, with a small company, they were like, get out of here with this garbage. Like, we can't hire you. So I think it's great. I think it's a great advice and something that no one knows about until you um try for it.
You think
So
about in the military, you find out your assignment a year,
months.
and
Yeah.
you're like,
Oh
all
yeah.
right, well, like, I guess I'll finish this job because I already know I'm going to this base in a year and it's already ordained and everything. Whereas in the like outside, it's just like they got a wreck. Sometimes that wreck might be up for a week, and you just got to be able to, when the coal is hot, you got to strike, right? So, um, you got to be ready for that, but just realize like, hey, like if you're a year out, unless you're doing like hiring our heroes or skill bridge, like build your network, but realize you're building your network to act on it much later down the road.
Yeah. So what was this company that you were going to start?
Yeah,
What
so it's
was
just like a small cyber security consulting thing that like I had talked about with a friend, and I was completely clueless about the ideas of what actually went into a business, right? And we ended up just like we are going to do boutique, like very service based things, like pen testing, vulnerability scanning, almost like a value added reseller type deal. And then I remember like I met with a couple leaders of local small businesses here in Austin who did stuff like that. Not quite the size of Praetorian, but much smaller. And I remember hearing from them like, Jesus, there's so much more work that goes into this than I thought. And I ended up talking to the guy I was working with, and it was just like, okay, like this isn't really going to work right now because I think he was actually going to get a full time job or going to stay in, and it was just like, with what this goes into, like, not ready for it yet. So
So when you decided to get out, and so you've done your 8 months, you punch, you're out. Um, what was it like for you leaving the service, like in terms of identity? And did the reserves help with that?
yeah, the reserves did help with it because there was a part of me that definitely still does cling on to my identity as a veteran, right? Like it's one of those first things you find out when you talk to me is like, eat vegetables, do CrossFit. I'm a veteran, So like, it was a big part of it, and it was a very safe thing that I felt like I had some authority in, doing the reserves help, but like I remember like when I first started this job, like it was one of those things like I really wanted to like put out there, and I really used it to kind of build a sense of community at that company, at Rapid 7 that I joined, of reaching out and speaking with other veterans. And eventually, the team there was fantastic, and the HR is called People Strategy Team, and the chief of People Strategy eventually let us put together a veterans resource group. And it was super cool because we were able to go and organize and do some things for the community, local to our company, but also outside of it, that drove some impact in terms of fundraising for Wounded Warrior and other things like that. So it was definitely like a huge part of it. It still is a huge part of my life, right? That I do some volunteerism with, but eventually, like, there's a point where it's like, okay, like when I was talking to my friends that were still in, am I now like more private sector Billy, or like am I more veteran Billy, and I find myself being like, okay, more of my identity is becoming someone who's in the private sector versus a veteran, right? And I think that's just a byproduct of time.
How long were you in the reserves before you decided to leave?
I did 2 years in the reserves, and then yeah, I decided it. Yeah.
Was it easier for you in terms of that identity switch to kind of go from full bore active duty to being in the reserve? So you're kind of doing it like you get to kind of come back in, back out, back in, back out, and then you essentially like wean yourself off of like military life. Was that easier, or did it make a difference, or what was that like for you?
That's a really good point. So I think it was that. I think it was like I still had this fear deep down inside of me of like, am I making the right decision? Right. And I talked all this stuff about before about like owning it and like, yeah, gung ho. But like, there's always a part of me that likes to hedge bets, likes to parlay a little bit. So I did the reserves because I still wanted to be in the service. And I just felt like so much of my life had been oriented around wearing the uniform, right, and working towards wearing the uniform and serving my country and all this stuff. And being in the reserve still allowed me to touch that. It allowed me to be part of it. It gave me the option of being like, hey, if the private sector doesn't work out for me, I still can go back in the military and like work MPA days or like find a full time reserve assignment, right? And eventually, I came to the conclusion of like, it was really starting to impact my job, right? Which I was like really loving, still do love, absolutely. And I remember it was like, okay, the stress back and forth, it was just, and I was moving, my parents are elderly and I was moving them down to Texas, and there was just like a lot of stuff that was going on where I was like, okay, I'm not, I think I'm ready to move on at this point. But it was a little bit, it was kind of like weaning, right? It was like, all right, getting out of the military, can't do it cold turkey. I'm gonna try and do the reserves and see how it goes. So
One thing that I'll say is people who are listening, you hear Billy talk about things like owning it, driving forward, having all this like bias towards action, to use an Amazon term, or me with all of these conversations I have with people where I'm giving advice. Something that I want to really highlight is all of the most of our insight is gained in post and very rarely felt in the moment.
Yeah,
And so don't think that if you're listening to this, you're preparing for your transition, you're like, dude, these guys are just paragons of just knowledge and military transitioning wisdom. We're just people who happen to have enough self-awareness to evaluate and go, man, that train wreck kind of sucked, and thank goodness I made it out, and I did a couple of things right that where I got lucky. So I think that at least that's how I felt. And for
yeah,
everyone out there listening, like, it's okay to feel fear and uncertainty and all these things,
100%.
because it's a big deal. And hopefully this podcast helps, and hopefully you might actually be going into your transition, if you're a listener of the show, much more prepared than any of us, because you're getting this before your transition happens, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
that that's really cool.
Yeah, and
So
the other point is like, we're both very lucky. One, we're both in Billy. Two, we got out like at a time when like the private sector in our field, is going nuts. I mean, it
booming,
was like, oh, I have an idea for a
booming.
security product, take my money, and jobs were plentiful, growth was plentiful. And now we're like in a spot where like there's a contraction a little bit, right, in terms of like what companies are being valued at and growth and things of that nature. So that has to be a part of your decision making process, right? Is like, I don't know if I would have gotten out of the military if I were getting out in, let's say, 2008, right, when the economy collapsed. I probably would have stayed in. I'd have been like, screw that, like I've got a stable job here, and like I don't want to get out and like not have anything to do, right? The whole point is I'm going to be doing something different. So that has to factor in, right? There's no like golden path. There's no like check all these boxes. Back to the earlier point of like, you're going to get everything you want if you do this. A big part of it is the people that you talk to, and how much they're willing to go to bat and support you. There's some macro things that you can't really, control. But having fear, having doubt, having uncertainty is a very, very important part of the process. And frankly, if you do not have not deer, fear, doubt, and
Deer in the
uncertainty.
headlights,
Yeah, exactly.
fear and
If you didn't
uncertainty.
kill a
Yeah, you
deer
just
the night
combined
before
them.
you
I
got
get
out,
it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, but if you don't have those things, then I don't think you're really thinking about it hard enough, right? Unless you have an absolutely horrific experience and some trauma or something. But like, you know, it's natural to go through that. And like, I still have like some things here and there that will strike me like, oh man, like those new uniforms are so cool. We're like, oh, there's this new cool career field that like I would love to have been doing. So that's just a part of the process. I think you're absolutely right. It's like it's not like you're on this golden path and it all works out perfectly. Like everyone, there's gonna be bumps along the way. There's gonna be these things that you can't really control. You just have to know that the sum of one is greater than the other.
I recently, when people listen to this, I will have recently watched my little brother graduate from the Air Force Academy, which is where I went to school. And um, I don't know how I'm going to do for that, because my sister in law graduated last year. When I was at that graduation, like the Thunderbirds, which everyone doesn't know, they're the fighter demonstration team for the Air Force. They do air shows, they do cool tricks and stuff in planes. It's sick. They fly over right at graduation, and dude, I was just like, oh my gosh, my heart. Like, I was like, sign me back up. Like, I'm
Yeah,
ready. And so yeah, it was I still feel like, man, well, I didn't choose to get out. I had other reasons, but I felt like this like loss, this like extreme loss in that moment. And that just it's just kind of a thing that happens. You just have to
yeah,
like move on with that,
yeah.
which
There's
is
a
crazy.
big difference between signing an employment contract and taking an oath. You know, and it sounds very, very flowery, right, and very idealistic, but like that's part of it, right, is like you are taking an oath, and you're willing to give up your life when you join the military, right? And you don't replicate that, and there's a part of you that's always going to hold on to that, I think. which is tough. But at the same time, you got to do what's best for you, right? So I get that sometimes too. Whenever I go down to San Antonio and I see something going on, or like in Austin, there's Camp Maybury, so I'll see some helicopters go by or like some cool planes, and I'm like, oh man, like, ah,
Like, it's so cool.
I know.
Yeah, I get it. I
Gonna go
get it.
back, look at my benefits package, like.
Yeah, I go on to bit. My wife is still in, so I get to be the military spouse, and I'll go on to base still, and I'm like, feels so good to be home. And so so I definitely get it. And something that you just said that I think is a really cool transition into a topic that I want to cover with you is a work contract is very different than an oath, which I goes back to the quote that you mentioned earlier, which is work in the military, work outside of the military is work. Work in the military is a lifestyle, and it's also an ethos.
Mhm.
And I want to know what that was that something that you internalized immediately, or was that something that you had to like take time to actually internalize? Because for me, I never even thought about that until when I started this podcast. I started this podcast because I finally realized I was looking at Amazon to fill every single gap in my life that the military had filled. And that was such a horrible way of looking at it because Amazon was never supposed to be that. Um, and it was like killing me because I was trying to find something in my employment that never existed. And so, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, that's a really really insightful observation. Um, so I think I kind of describe it like when you have like a piece of food stuck between your back teeth or something, or like maybe you bit your cheek and something's there, and like it's driving you nuts, but you can't get at it until you really like break out the floss or whatever it is. um that was kind of like the you know just have your podcast. It was something that kind of hit me, and it took me a little bit to think about what it was. So I was doing the reserves, right? So I like was getting part of this experience, but even then, it wasn't like directly tied to what I was doing at work and like my day to day so much. And it was like that 20% of that lifestyle, that ethos, right? It was like the volunteerism. It was driving an impact and building a community. And some people don't like that, right? And that's maybe part of the reason why they're getting out, right? Is they're like, I don't want to do that. I just want like a 9 to 5 and to be done and then have my own stuff. But like for me, there was like something about my job being tied to creating a broader impact outside the job, I guess, that like was really eating at me. And eventually I realized it was like, hey, I want to help people who were in a similar position to myself, right? And I think that's exactly kind of it's what you're doing with this podcast. And it gets into that volunteer aspect of like, in the military, I remember we do volunteering all the time. San Antonio Food Bank, all this other stuff, and there was a real like emphasis on mentorship, which was very important, and all just this like whole person concept, right? Which really I kind of took for granted, right? As part of that lifestyle, that ethos. And I remember I got out and I was like, okay, like something, I need something. And I remember I started doing the veteran mentorship, and it was something that happened organically at work, where I was just talking to people who were joining, who were recently separated, and I was like, this is really cool, and I am feeling like chills when I do this, and I feel really good about it, and like it's great, and I want to add some structure around this. So I started doing veterana or veterati, I'm sorry, for the mentorship, which is how we first spoke, which was incredible. And then working to start in a veterans group at my company, and like that kind of scratched those itches. But like you're absolutely right, there's like just a part of it that um, and I'd say that's part of interviewing at your company, is like if you can have the foresight to realize that that's something that you value, and make that part of your interview process. Like, hey, if being a veteran is a huge part of my identity, and I go to this company, are there going to be other people like me there, right? That can share my life experience, that I can talk to, that I can, you know, tell jokes about the military that only military people would get, right? Like, can't tell you how many MRE jokes I drop and just fall completely flat. And I'd be like, why would anyone just never had MRE understand?
Everyone's lame.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, so it's like a really big like boxed lunch that you guys would eat, and
It's like a Lunchable, sure.
yeah, I mean, like, I can't just tell you. I had to completely remove, vegetarian omelet from my repertoire of jokes, and it killed me inside.
That's rough.
So,
That's tough, man. That was easily the worst part of your military.
yeah, exactly. Cyber,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think that that's great, man. And um, yeah, it's such a tough thing to internalize, and it was such a big breakthrough for me to get. And something that I'll tack on to what you're saying is, to people listening, this is just my opinion. And I really want you to check me if you disagree with this, because I think that this is, my words are my own, I
Mhm.
guess. I think that in the military, because our job is our lifestyle and our job is our ethos, we automatically assume that our job needs to be like, volunteering needs to be tied up in my job, or my friends need to be tied up in my job, because that's what it was in the military. What I have, the balance that I have found, which I think is really interesting, is that the my mentality shift was, my job can literally just be my source of income, and I can do everything outside of my job. Like, there's a bunch of facets of my life. My employment is very one of those, and then the volunteering, the mentoring, the finding camaraderie, finding the community, those don't have to exist within my company. And I think for me, that was such a major mental breakthrough, because I for so long was like, well, it all existed under the, like, purview of the military the last time, so it should just all exist under the purview of the company that I work for now. And so my breakthrough was decoupling all of those things and understanding that they can exist separately from each other. Like, there's a veterans group in AWS. I'm not very involved because I do this,
Yeah.
and that's my version. And I think that that was huge for me. But I would love to know what you think about
Yeah, no, I think I agree. It's looking at yourself as a whole person, right? And your experiences, and breaking out that pie chart of like what you need and where you need it, right? And the veteran mentorship I do is through a third party now, and it's persisted through 3 jobs that I've had, right? Then again, you could be getting out because you didn't like that volunteer aspect, right? You just wanted a 9 to 5, and you hated the fact that you could be this incredible tradesperson, and then you weren't getting the strat you deserved because you didn't bake cookies for the volunteer event or something like that. And I know a lot of people who were like that. Like, I couldn't take that crap. I was the best at this job, and then someone who wasn't as good as me got promoted because they did all the other stuff around it. I just want to be somewhere I can be the best. So I think it's about reflecting on where everything kind of sits in terms of what you value to your experience and where you want to put those things, right? You're absolutely right. I don't, maybe some people, I mean, don't want to put that at all near their job. A lot of people don't, like, I don't want this to be a part of my review. I want my work to be my review, right? And I want that to be the only thing that matters. I want my work to be a closed off place where I am a professional, and I wear, my quarter zip and my polo, and I go in, I smile, and I go back, and I'm playing guitar. I've got a ton of tattoos, and I'm on my motorcycle. I don't want those 2 places to ever mix, right? We're in the military, you can't really separate them that much, right? So yeah, I agree. I think it's just looking at yourself and being like, okay, what do I need to feel fulfilled? Can I still do those things regardless of my professional situation, right? And if they're a part of my professional situation, do I want to be involved in them?
that. Yeah. So, do you play guitar, have a ton of tattoos, and ride a motorcycle?
I do not play guitar. I have 0 tattoos, but I do have a motorcycle.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's 2 truths and a lie,
There you
or
go.
2 lies and a truth, I guess. um, I think something that I'm really interested about is, how did you build the awareness to dig deep enough into yourself to come to an understanding of kind of what we're talking about? Because you kind of said it was like this like thing that was in the back of your head that you didn't understand. And so how did you be vulnerable enough and build enough awareness to actually be able to define it and then have a conversation about it? Because I think that those are two, that's like that's an evolution
Sure.
of yourself, and I want to know how you got there because I think a lot of people lack that.
Yeah, I think, and this is just for me, there needs to be a catalyst for some self-reflection, right? For growth. And that catalyst for me um, was the change and uncertainty of getting out of the military. It was a major change of lifestyle, right? It was like taking that perfectly stacked box of accoutrement, whatever's in it, and you're just shaking it up, right? And as it's being shaken, I'm thinking, oh crap, these are the things that I don't want to break inside. If I had to choose two things to break, these two things can break, but as long as this one thing doesn't break, I don't care, right? And if it ends up, if it's upside down, is that really important, or does it have to stand? Do I want things to fall out? And it was that change, right? And it was that uneasiness, it was that uncertainty where personally I feel like I experienced a ton of growth. And I wouldn't lie if I said that wasn't part of the reason why I decided to get out of the military, was everything was just so linear, right? Like you check the boxes, you do these things. I was like, okay, like I'm going to get good at, you know, promoting or whatever it is to get to that level. But personally, I didn't feel like I was growing, if that makes sense. Through that experience of change and being vulnerable and being uncertain, I felt all these things I hadn't really felt in a long time. I mean, maybe when I was getting out of college, right? I was just like, there's all this stuff going on. And then slowly over time, I was able to kind of dissect little experiences, right? And contextualize them. So the time and the experience were really, integral parts of that, of being able to contextualize what I was feeling, why I was feeling those things. But without change, I would have had no reason to do that, right? So it was committing to the change. It was going through that allowed me to experience what I experienced.
Do you think that there's anything that you could have told yourself before you got out to be the catalyst for that evaluation? And here's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking. I think that a lot of people will not think about what you did. And I also like, I don't think people build that self awareness before they get out of the military. Then they hit those rough seas of getting out of the military, and there is the uncertainty, and there is the lack of linearity, there is the shakeup of all of the things, the accoutrement is all
Yeah.
shaken up. But I also don't think that people view that chaos as a catalyst for growth. I think that people most of the time just try and like put their head down and run through it as quickly as possible. And so then they end up on the other side and they might not be in a job that they like, or like you said, they take the first job that exists because they just want the chaos to end. Um, so, what do you think you would have needed to hear before the chaos to have done that work to have made the chaos a little bit easier in like as you're going through that process?
Yeah, so I don't. That's tough because I don't know if anything can substitute for it, right? Because I think that chaos, that uncertainty, really was the crucible that kind of mentally I needed to get to where I wanted to be, and nothing could have substituted for it, right? And I think staying in the military, that's it's a amazing. It wasn't for me, right? And you can go through experiences in the military, when you're staying in based on your job, your duty station, what you're going through, that can serve as that crucible, right? That experience of personal and self growth, right? For me, it was getting out and having this ownership of what's next that kind of frightened me. It was like suddenly the backpack that I had been carrying, someone had been holding the stones through this incredible system, and then all at once, it got dumped in. I was like,
Sink or
oh,
swim.
yeah, exactly. Like, is my back going to break, or am I going to get strong enough to like walk with this thing and do it? And I think what really helped was, and this is kind of self-serving, was when, I was able to get my job and do reasonably well there, was like, okay, I want to be in a position now where I remember that feeling, and I think that feeling is very important to the process, but I want to let people know that there's a support network out there, right, for it, and that there's people who have walked this path that are willing to help them out and lend a hand, who have gone through the same exact thing, right? And it's out there, right? And if you need to like grab on, you're crossing that bridge, right, of transitioning to the private sector, and you're falling off, instead of having to tiptoe on it, and if you fall off, you go down a ravine. There are some ropes that you can grab onto, right, of people who've been through that experience, right? And I felt like gratification out of being there for people in that situation, and helping out, right? So yeah, I don't know if there's anything I could have told myself. I can tell you right now, like, adverse situation is like going through some of the stuff that they teach you when you're transitioning out of the military, right? It's a good program, TAPS and stuff like that. It still doesn't prepare you for the chaos, right? I think it's presented in a way where, oh yeah, do these things and you'll get the job, right? Which is kind of, only partially true, right?
It's a very shallow description of the military transition for
Yeah.
sure.
It's like, wear your suit. Here's how you wear a suit correctly. Like, put these bullets on a resume, right? And like, it's good. And I think they do a good job of like kind of putting the ideas into people's head of like what you need to be thinking about. But like, there's a much deeper psychological component to it of being able to have confidence in a very stormy sea, right? Where the skies are dark and you're not sure what direction your ship is going in, but still being able to like kind of stand on the bow and be like, this is where I want to go. I can tell this is the direction I want to go in, even though like you're thrashing about, and you can't really distinguish the horizon from, some rocks out there, but still knowing that you want to be on that ship, right, is I think something that you just have to go through, and a conclusion you have to come to on your own.
It's an interesting conclusion because I had a similar conversation with one of my guests a couple of episodes ago where he came to a similar conclusion that there really is no substitute for that like fire or like the chaos as the catalyst for change. And it's an interesting question then, if you cannot experience the growth necessary to make it through your transition until your transition, so you're essentially bottoming out or you're hitting that chaos head on. um how do you set up safeguards so that when you do make contact with the chaos, you don't just completely cave?
Yeah.
And the thing that you said that was highlighted in the last episode that I completely agree with is community. Community can catch you, community can be there to help you. And if you isolate yourself or you go through this turbulence with turbulence Air Force joke, haha. If you
Ground
if you
tremor.
go through this,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you go through this by yourself, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting question because I agree with you. Like, I don't think I could have told myself a single thing where I would have believed you. Um, that getting out would have been as hard as it was for me
Yeah.
mentally. And that's an interesting question. And I'm hopeful that with the podcast that people might not believe me or believe you, but if people hear it enough times, they'll at least when they feel that like gnawing sensation in the back of their tooth, like you said, they might be able to self-diagnose a little bit quicker than if they were going in blind, um, which is very important.
Yeah, and there are things too, as I'm thinking about it, and you're talking about it here, where like, if that gets too much, where it's impacting my ability to find a job, there's also some structure and guardrails you can put around your transition through programs, right? Like Hiring Our Heroes, like SkillBridge, where you can kind of put yourself in a cohort or a program that is going to help facilitate that for you, that first job, right? That's going to put you on people that are exact same position as you right now. So if I could go back in time, I probably would have investigated those programs a little bit more. I had no idea they existed. I had no idea how they worked, and I had no idea how to like approach a company about them either. So I'd say, everyone I know who's gone through those programs has had a great experience. I work pretty closely with Hiring Our Heroes, in some of the regional offices there, and it's been absolutely amazing experience from the employer side too. So if that chaos, and like you're like, hey, maybe I want a little bit of that burden to be shouldered by some structure, go through one of those programs, because they are absolutely fantastic.
I completely agree, and I think that's a phenomenal piece of advice. Find community, and there are ways to add structure to your transition
Yeah,
should you desire to do that. Um, Billy, it's been great.
really.
Before we get going, do you have any final words or final piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, we're out here. you know, um,
Love it.
we're doing this, and you'll find a very large community of veterans from all walks of life who are willing to help you if you decide that you want to go to the military. So never
Mm,
feel like you have to do the entire transition by yourself. If you're feeling lost, if you're feeling very stressed out, if you need some advice, if you've decided you want to get out and you don't know where to go, find some community. You can always reach out to me over LinkedIn. I'm a resource. I do the veteran mentorship through Veterati, but like, trust me, you're not going through this alone. There's other people who can help you out, and take advantage of it.
Completely agree. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today, for giving your time to give all this advice back into the community. Like Billy said, if you really interested in what he was talking about, feel free to find him on LinkedIn. Um, that's it. Thank you always, valued listeners, for listening to this episode. Uh, if you liked it, subscribe. We would love to see you on the next episode. But until then, we'll talk to you later. Peace.